Hi students, it's Dr. Marks and we're going to talk about effective use of PowerPoint. Now I'm sure that most of you are very familiar with using PowerPoint. I just want to give you a few tips, and if you're not particularly strong with PowerPoint, this will be very helpful, but it's also going to communicate expectations. You need to plan your presentation. So think about a few things before you get started. Who is your audience? Hopefully that has been communicated to you. Why are you doing this presentation? What exactly is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it you want to accomplish? And of course, if you're given a prompt, by all means, and this is really important, be sure you actually answer the prompt. So read that prompt, craft your presentation. Before you finalize it, read that prompt again, read it a third time. Make sure that you have done what's been asked of you. As you craft your PowerPoint presentation, you want to be selective because you're not going to put every word on your slides. Now, I tend to be a little bit more word heavy, but you also are going to hear me going off script like I am doing right now. You don't want to seem like you've scripted this, right? You don't want it to seem like you're reading a script from a play. You don't want to appear that you're turning to your slides and reading them. That is not very interesting because you want this to be conversational. That's going to be more interesting for the listener. But you have to put enough because remember, your slides are going to be your outline, your guide. A lot of times you're not going to be able to have any kind of notes in front of you. So if you do a good job putting content on the slides, you've got your notes right there. So it's a balancing act. Don't forget your cover slide, folks. What's your presentation name? And again, maybe try to give it an interesting name. Melanie Marks, Economics 101. It might not be very interesting. Who are you? What's your affiliation? You get the idea. And there's all kinds of ways to make it attractive. It doesn't have to be super boring. As you decide the look of your PowerPoint, think about your slide design. And remember, there's all kinds of nice canned designs that are already in PowerPoint, the package available to you, and you can use them. But you have to also think about the nitty-gritty font size, color contrast, and the background that you're using, use of animation or not. And you're going to see that my graduate student that I worked with on this a long time ago added some animation to this just to be funny and show you things are distracting, and I don't know how to get all of it out. So you're going to be stuck with some crazy animation, but that will drive my point home. Of course, you need to be thinking carefully about the slide content, what's going to be on each slide, and what's too much. Guys, you don't have to put everything on one slide. If you think your slides are too busy, a little hard to view, you can craft more slides. That's the beauty of PowerPoint. You can have a whole bunch of slides. And of course, bullet spacing, indentation, those kinds of things are going to change the look and just make it look a little bit more professional. From start to finish, whatever your design is, you've got to have consistency of slides. I know you've seen presentations done by peers where from start to finish, you don't see cohesiveness. Maybe there's font changes or weird color changes or formatting changes, and you're like, okay, just clean this up a little bit. So you know what I'm talking about, consistency from start to finish. All right, font size, guys, just to give you some idea, for the font that I'm using, you see the first line is 32. So that would be an appropriate font size. It does vary by font though, right? If you use a slightly larger font, it could be 32 of a different font, but be slightly bigger. So you get the idea. But 32, this gives you an idea. Below that, where I say it could be smaller, that's 24. So that could work. It depends. You don't want to have so many lines on the slide that it gets overwhelming. But at the very bottom where it says this is not an appropriate font size, that is 16 in the font that I'm using. So please make sure that your font size is reasonable. Now, I know that some of you are going to be recording presentations depending on what class you're viewing this for, and others are going to be doing them live in class. So you need to think about your environment. If I'm looking at a computer because you've recorded it, well, I might be able to see 24 just fine. But if you're doing a live presentation, think about the room that you're going to be in. Old ladies like me, we wear bifocals. If you start getting too small in your font, I'm not going to be able to see a thing that you're doing. And of course, that's going to detract from grading. All right, you get the idea. Font color and background. Please make sure whatever background you have, it doesn't have to be a white background, but whatever your background, you need to have a good contrast between your background and your font color. So I've given you an example of a good contrast. Black and white's always a winner. It can be boring though. And then below that it says this is an example of a bad font color. Now if I made that a darker blue, it'd be fine. It doesn't have to be black and white, but it does need to be a good contrast. And guys, I want to remind you that if you're giving a live presentation, those projectors wash out the colors. It might look really crisp on your computer monitor, then you go to present it and it doesn't look quite as crisp. You're going to see a lot of washout when you give a live presentation on a projector. Backgrounds can be fun, like you see this one. This is a beautiful background, but you see the font on top of it's a little challenging. So avoid using backgrounds that are too busy or are unprofessional. If you are using a background though, as I say at the bottom, choose a font color carefully. So you see the white on the blue pops pretty well. The black against the blue does not. Again, it's all about being careful in your decisions. Picture backgrounds. They're fun too, but as you see here, picture backgrounds can make it harder to read the text. They're distracting, but pictures are useful. And depending on what class you're taking with me, if you're on a study abroad, for example, and you're doing your final presentation, you're going to want to have lots of pictures to illustrate those things that you saw, the observations you made, and you want to infuse them into your PowerPoint. So think about how to do that in a manner that is going to be constructive and not make it hard for people to see what you're doing. This would not be a very well constructed slide, obviously, but you can do better than this. Again, I'm not the expert on PowerPoint, but you want to show a picture, you could put text on the side. There's lots of ways you can design it. And guys, there's even things that can pop up that say, hey, we have a better design for this slide, and you can take advantage of those. So PowerPoint gives you a lot of these kinds of tips along the way. But here I can see your picture. It's big enough. Remember, don't have your pictures be tiny. And if there's something you need to tell me about the picture, and especially if you're trying to remind yourself to tell me something about a picture, that's a good place to have information on the side. All I've done there on the right is I've added a text box. So the first note says you can have a picture take up the full slide without text. That's fine if you want to show a whole picture, but then you've got to remember what it was you wanted to tell me about the picture. Or as the bottom note says, you could do something side by side. And as I explained to you, this is a text box. I've just inserted a text box and put my typing in there. That way, if there's something important that I want to remember to tell you about a picture or a graph or anything like that, I've got the note there to myself. All right, when we talk about slide content, you're going to see reference to the 6x6 rule, and I do violate this a little bit, but the idea is that there should be one thought per line. That makes sense. 6 or fewer words per line, and that's really about, I'm not going to lie, I probably violate this a little bit. If it's 8, if you think it's readable, then you're probably fine. 6 or fewer lines per slide, that's not a bad rule there. So your 6x6 rule. Overall, guys, it's up to you. This is your project, your presentation. You use your judgment. If you think you can squeeze on another line and you think it makes more sense to squeeze on a 7th line rather than have a second slide, then that might be a really good choice. Just be sure, in the end, everything is readable because that is key. As you're designing your slides, as you know, you don't want to write too much. So there shouldn't be paragraphs. Sometimes I get students who are just kind of lazy, so they've just kind of crafted a paragraph, or maybe they've plagiarized and lifted a paragraph from somewhere else, and that is not a good idea for plagiarism reasons, but also we don't put paragraphs on our slides. You want to have bullets, and you want those bullets to be reasonably concise, not too concise, but reasonably concise. You want them to parallel what's coming out of your mouth though. I don't know if you've ever had a professor who is showing you one thing on the screen and then out of their mouth is something completely different. You just don't see the connection. So doesn't mean you can't go off script. I'm going off script right now, but make sure that wherever you are in your presentation parallels what it is that's coming out of your mouth. So here's clearly a very badly designed slide. This is a slide that's not well constructed because, as we said, this does not use anything even close to the 6x6 rule. And this would be extremely hard to read while we're listening to your presentation. Again, you get the idea. There's a fine balance. This might be an example of something that is too spelled out, and I'm just using stuff from my econometrics class because I watch this too. And it says the dependent variable I am using in my model is per capita GDP. Okay, it's not bad. It's a little wordy. You don't need all those words, but you at the same time don't want to be too brief. This is too concise. My dep var GDP PC. Now, if you're in my capstone class, you'd probably know what that means, but that's probably not a very good idea for a presentation, especially when you have a varied audience. So maybe something like this would be optimal. My dependent variable equals GDP per capita. It's not so wordy. I can get the sense of it very quickly, and it doesn't rely on all those little bitty abbreviations like dep var GDP PC. You get the idea. I love PowerPoints that space bullets because it's easier to read, and I'm going to make sure you know how to do that. This is what I mean. These bullets right here are too close together. It makes it harder to read, so you really should use the spacing option, and you can make your PowerPoint look a little bit better. Now, I think this is better. It might be too much space for you, and that's fine. You can make it a little bit tighter. You can do something in between. I'm going to show you how. But I think this is better. What I've done here is use the space before and the space after option. You could use just before and not after, and it will make it a little bit tighter, but it's easier to read in my opinion. So again, if you think it's too much space, you can do it in between the top and the bottom options. Now, if you're not familiar with this, this is how you put space before and after your bullets. First, you're going to right click and go to paragraph. All right, so basically what I'm saying is go to where you want to space, right click, you're going to see the option for paragraph, and then see spacing. I have a red box around it, and that's another good thing, guys, when you're doing a PowerPoint presentation. If you want somebody's attention on something, underline it. Put a box around it, put an arrow pointing to it. It makes it a lot easier. So see how it says spacing before and after, 0 points, 0 point. That's the first option that I did in the previous slide where I said these are a little bit too close together. Now, the second option, I changed the before to a 6 and after to a 6. So 6 points before and 6 points after, and then it became more spaced out. If you thought it was a little too spaced out, you can do 6 and 0, and it will be kind of in between. So again, that is really handy. It makes your bullets look much better, and you can do this in Word as well, guys. It's not just a PowerPoint thing. As we said, from start to finish, you need consistency. Your slides should have a similar format, same colors, fonts, structure, and if you're using some kind of animation, those animations should basically work the same on every slide. Sometimes I'm doing a presentation and I've used just very basic animations like I'm doing here, right? You see them just appearing, they're not all there. So I'm using an animation. They don't have to be crazy animations. And then I get to a slide where I forgot to add the animations and I'm like, oh, I hate that. But you're seeing animations here. You want your bullet format to be the same. Whatever bullet shape you're using should be the same. If you're indenting and changing to a different bullet as you indent, make sure that's the same. The whole bulleted structure needs to look similar across different slides. Now, there's the animation that I don't know how to get rid of, but you get the idea. I probably could figure it out if I took a few minutes, but I haven't. So that was a great introduction to animations because we have some crazy animations and some have sound and different effects, and it can be a nice touch in key places. For example, maybe there's a big punchline and you want some different looking animation. That's fine, but guys, it detracts if it's overdone. I mean, in one slide I've had 3 animations. I guess it was a slide transition. That's probably where I need to find that crazy animation that kind of went into a swirly. So I had a slide animation, and then I had 2 other animations with bullets in terms of how they entered the page. And more slide animations. You got the idea. I personally like the line by line animation, and that's what I'm using here. And so on the click of my mouse or on the click of the enter button or with your clicker, whatever you're using, those lines of text appear individually. And again, click of the mouse is all I'm doing right here. So if you're recording a presentation, just click your mouse and you'll see them appear. I think it makes it easier for the viewer to see the points you're making because they can follow where you are on your slides. And there's a shortcut method. You don't have to do line by line by line. If you want to add animations like I have here, again, there's a whole bunch of different choices. I'm simply using the most simple form. So if you want to do this, you just open the animation tab in your ribbon and you can highlight each line in order. So basically, take your cursor, just, highlight the first line, hit the kind of animation you want, then go to the next line, hit the animation you want, and that's going to work. And each time what I'm doing here is just called appear. It just appears. It doesn't come in from the left and right, and it doesn't do swirlies, and it doesn't have any sound with it. It's just really professional. Or put your cursor to the right of the first bullet. So look at where the right of the first bullet is. So go to the first line, just to the right of the bullet. If you put your cursor there, as long as everything is lined up here, you don't have a lot of different indentations, as long as you put your cursor there and you hit appear, it's going to actually number all of these. In this case, it would just number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would do all of them at one time. You wouldn't have to go line by line. So that's a nice shortcut. So here's what I mean. If you're not familiar, here is your animation tab, right? And if you don't have any animations, it's going to say none right there, that very first box. But I'm using the animation called appear. So highlight what you want to show up and then hit the animation. Click on appear if that's what you want. Or as I said, you can put your cursor to the right of the first bullet. When you hit the appear button, it should number everything. So if you have 6 rows, 6 lines of information, it should number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's talk about tables because you might have some tables in your presentation, and this is a really ugly table, first of all. And so take a look at that table for just a second. Notice that there's things wrapping around. This is kind of an automated color scheme. It's ugly. So somebody tried to lift their table, paste it in here, and then PowerPoint kind of changes the format. Well, you're going to have to mess with it a bit. But the first step is make sure they are big enough. And this table right here could be bigger on the slide. If I'm in the back of the room with me and my bifocals, I am not going to be able to read this table. And then what's the point of your presentation if no one can see what it is you're trying to communicate? So we can make it bigger. This still isn't very great. I don't love this, but it's better looking, but you still have to make sure the font is big enough. So even if you drag the corners of your table, it's going to make the table bigger. It's not necessarily going to make your font bigger. So in my opinion, this is still too hard to read. So you would need to go in and highlight and literally change the font size. Highlight and go to the home button and make the font bigger. So I've done that right here. Now you see my font is bigger. I've played with the format a little bit. Still have some things that I think are kind of unattractive. So I don't love sometimes how PowerPoint messes up formats for tables that you bring in. If you want it to look exactly like the table that you have in a paper, for example, or something that you've already done, you can kind of basically take a snip of it. But if you cut and paste it like in Word, it's going to mess up the format. But either way, note here the contrasting colors. I'm trying to make it a little bit easier to read. I still think this is ugly, but I think it has made it more readable. But you can change the colors, you can change the formatting. You just need to play with these formats. But big enough font, change color schemes, make it readable. So guys, but I want to remind you that just like I should have when I give a lecture, you should have a conclusion. Your presentation should have a conclusion. And I don't mean, well, that's it, guys. I hear that a lot. And that's my presentation. That is not a conclusion. So your PowerPoint presentation should have a conclusion just like an essay has a conclusion. Hopefully somebody's wrapping up. If you're looking at somebody's speech, you get the idea. Just do not end abruptly because there's nothing good about that. So a conclusion offers a recap. So you've heard the expression, tell them again, and tell them what you told them. Your conclusion is basically recapping what you've done. Okay, so, in looking back, this is what we took away. This is what we learned. Tell us kind of the key takeaways, remind us of some connections, whatever your recap should be. But you could also extend by talking about things that should be considered, maybe things that are interesting, things that you want to ponder and think more about. Again, it depends on the type of presentation you're doing. If it's a technical presentation, you might talk about areas of concern. Where did your methodology not work so well? What would you do differently? If you had more time, where would you expand on research? Again, tailor it towards the type of presentation you're giving. Finally, we need to talk about avoiding plagiarism, because just like when you write a paper, you could have plagiarism in a PowerPoint. It is important that you cite your sources on individual slides. In other words, what I'm saying is slide by slide by slide. If you use data, you need to tell us where it comes from. You could put it at the bottom if it's kind of a table or something that comes from this. You don't necessarily need a full citation on the actual slide, but it needs to be clear because we can find the full citation in your references. Your full citation goes in that final slide where you're going to put your references. So give the basics. Maybe you found some data at OECD.com, their website. So that would be what you would want to put on an individual slide. But if this is coming from a particular report, then that whole report needs to be cited on that reference slide. So you're ending your presentation with your references on your slide for purposes for my class doing a presentation. Now, if you're watching this for your capstone course, we're probably not as interested in a reference slide there. But if you're doing this for a Citizenship 110 class and you've used some references, for a study abroad class and you've used some references and you've collected data, yeah, we're going to want to see some documentation. I don't really care what format people use for their references. I know, for example, in my study abroad, you come from all different disciplines. Just use whatever your discipline uses and the one that you're most familiar with. Whatever, you can pick that. So let's talk finally about effectively presenting when we're using PowerPoint. Please, when you're using PowerPoint to deliver a presentation, don't hide behind the podium. And again, that's if you're giving a live presentation, like in a class, with real live human beings in front of you. Of course, not if you're recording a presentation and uploading it. Please don't play with the clicker in your hand. That's just a sure sign that you're nervous. It's very distracting to the listener. As you're interacting with your slides, don't turn your back to the audience to read a PowerPoint slide. That's never a good idea. So think about turning your body slightly. And of course, don't seem like you're just reading. You want to rely on the slides. You want what's coming out of your mouth to be parallel to what's on your slides. But if it just seems like all you're doing is reading, like you're reading a script, that's not going to be very interesting. Think about what you're doing with your hands. Keep them by your side or put them behind your back. Keep yourself from fidgeting, playing with your hair. Sometimes I have students with pens and they're so nervous and they're just clicking, 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 and I just want to rip that pen out of their hand. Things you do want to do, maintain that eye contact. Again, when you're giving a live presentation and you have slides, you might pivot slightly to view that slide. That way I'm not turning my whole back to the audience. So think about where you're going to put your body so that you can see your audience, and then you can pivot just slightly but still see the slides next to you or behind you. Also, direct the listener's attention to the slide in different ways. And this is whether you're giving a live presentation or you're recording it. So maybe you have a graph and you want to gesture or use a pointer, or if it's something recorded, a verbal command. It could be, okay, notice the red line on the graph. Okay, now you've told the viewer where you want them to look. So use your verbal commands, and if you're live, you could also use a pointer or a gesture to direct the listener's attention to where you want them to see. And so you may have seen me do this in lecture if you were in any classes where we looked at graphs and I had a recording where I said, okay, see that red line, or look where the blue line intersects the red line. All right, what does that tell us? Here's my references, just like I said, you should have depending on the class that you're in. So guys, you're probably way better at PowerPoint than I am, but I do want you to take this seriously. I wanted to set expectations so there were no surprises, and if you haven't had a lot of opportunity to craft PowerPoint, that you would get some tips. So not trying to say I have a lot of expertise, and you guys are probably far more clever than I am, but these are the basics. If you stick to these basics, you will be in great shape. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. And again, thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day.